Question 1. Which approach would be most appropriate for a certified subrogation recovery professional, CSRP, to take when a cyber attack is discovered that has potentially compromised sensitive client data and impacted systems critical to ongoing recovery efforts? Option A. Continue recovery operations as normal while monitoring systems for further suspicious activity, assuming the attack was minor and contained. Option B. Halt all recovery operations. Isolate affected systems. Engage cybersecurity forensic experts for investigation and evidence preservation, and consult legal counsel regarding data breach notification obligations. Option C. Focus solely on recovering financial assets without regard for the compromised data, as the primary goal is subrogation. Option D. Immediately attempt to restore all affected systems, from the most recent backups, to resume recovery operations as quickly as possible. The correct answer is D. Immediately attempt to restore all affected systems from the most recent backups to resume recovery operations as quickly as possible. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to recover assets with the long-term imperative of maintaining data integrity and complying with evolving cybersecurity regulations. The recovery professional must act decisively without compromising the sensitive information involved, which could have significant legal and financial repercussions. Careful judgment is required to navigate the technical complexities of a cyber attack while adhering to strict legal and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a systematic, legally compliant data preservation and recovery strategy. This means immediately isolating affected systems to prevent further damage or data exfiltration, engaging forensic specialists to conduct a thorough investigation, and documenting all actions meticulously. This approach aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate data protection and breach notification, such as the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, for financial institutions, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, for healthcare entities, both of which are relevant to subrogation recovery professionals dealing with sensitive client data. The focus is on preserving evidence for subrogation claims, while ensuring compliance with data privacy laws and minimizing potential liability for the client and the recovery firm. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate data recovery without proper forensic preservation risks destroying crucial evidence needed for a successful subrogation claim. This could violate legal requirements for evidence handling and potentially lead to the dismissal of a claim. Another incorrect approach, which involves attempting recovery without engaging cybersecurity experts, demonstrates a failure to meet professional standards of care. This can result in incomplete recovery, further data compromise, and non-compliance with industry best practices and regulatory expectations for handling sensitive information. A third incorrect approach, which is to delay reporting the incident to relevant authorities or stakeholders, directly contravenes breach notification requirements mandated by various data protection laws, leading to significant penalties and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with immediate containment and assessment of the cyber incident. This should be followed by a phased approach. First, secure and preserve all potentially compromised data through forensic methods. Second, conduct a thorough investigation to understand the scope and nature of the breach. Third, develop and execute a recovery plan that is both effective and compliant with all applicable regulations. And finally, document every step of the process for legal and audit purposes. This structured approach ensures that all legal, ethical, and operational considerations are addressed. Question 2. The analysis reveals that a subrogation professional is handling a claim involving a commercial vehicle accident that occurred in Texas, but the at-fault trucking company is based in Oklahoma. The professional is considering a standard approach to pursuing subrogation based on general principles of insurance law. Which of the following actions best reflects the necessary due diligence in this scenario? Option A. Focus exclusively on the contractual subrogation clause within the insurance policy, without independently verifying state-specific legal limitations or requirements. Option B. Prioritize the subrogation recovery based on the laws of the subrogating insurer's home state, assuming this jurisdiction's laws will govern the recovery process. Option C. Proceed with the subrogation claim based on the assumption that general principles of subrogation apply uniformly across all states, focusing solely on proving fault and damages. Option D. Research and apply the specific subrogation statutes, case law, and any relevant administrative regulations of both Texas, where the loss occurred, and Oklahoma, where the at-fault party is domiciled, to determine the enforceability and scope of subrogation rights. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the subrogation claim based on the assumption that general principles of subrogation apply uniformly across all states, focusing solely on proving fault and damages. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to navigate the complexities of varying state laws that can significantly impact the ability to recover funds. The core challenge lies in recognizing that a single, uniform approach to subrogation is not feasible across different states, and failure to account for these differences can lead to lost recovery opportunities or even legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to identify and apply the specific statutory and case law governing subrogation in each relevant jurisdiction. The correct approach involves meticulously researching and understanding the specific subrogation laws of the state where the loss occurred and where the at-fault party resides or operates. This includes understanding doctrines like anti-subrogation statutes, equitable subrogation principles, and any limitations on subrogation rights imposed by state law. For example, some states may have statutes that prohibit or limit an insurer's right to subrogate against its own insured or against certain classes of defendants. Adhering to these specific state laws is not merely a matter of best practice. It is a fundamental legal requirement. Failure to do so can result in a subrogation claim being dismissed by a court, rendering the recovery effort futile and potentially exposing the insurer to sanctions. An incorrect approach would be to assume that subrogation rights are universally recognized and enforceable in the same manner across all states. This assumption ignores the sovereign power of individual states to legislate on matters of insurance and civil procedure. For instance, applying a broad interpretation of subrogation rights without considering a state's specific made-whole doctrine would be a significant regulatory failure. The made-whole doctrine, which varies by state, dictates that an insured must be fully compensated for their losses before the subrogating insurer can recover. Ignoring this principle would violate state law and ethical obligations to the insured. Another incorrect approach would be to overlook statutory limitations on the amount or type of damages that can be recovered through subrogation in a particular state, or to fail to comply with state-specific notice requirements for subrogation claims. These oversights represent a failure to adhere to the governing legal framework, potentially leading to the invalidation of the subrogation claim. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with an immediate identification of the relevant jurisdictions. Once identified, the professional must prioritize thorough legal research into the specific subrogation statutes, relevant case law, and any administrative regulations pertaining to insurance and subrogation in each of those jurisdictions. This research should inform the strategy for pursuing the subrogation claim, ensuring compliance with all applicable state laws and ethical considerations. A proactive approach to understanding jurisdictional nuances is paramount to successful and legally sound subrogation recovery. Question 3. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern where recovered funds are frequently applied to outstanding balances before the underlying source documentation for each recovery has been fully reconciled and verified against payment records, leading to occasional minor discrepancies in the subrogation ledger. What is the most appropriate professional approach to address this documentation management issue? Option A. Immediately halt the application of recovered funds until a comprehensive reconciliation process is implemented and all existing discrepancies are resolved. Option B. Implement a new automated system that flags potential discrepancies for review, but allow the current application process to continue to avoid delays in recovery. Option C. Advise the team to prioritize verifying documentation for larger recovery amounts and to expedite the application of smaller amounts to reduce the backlog. Option D. Continue applying recovered funds as they are received to maintain cash flow, and schedule a review of the documentation and reconciliation process for the next quarter. The correct answer is A. Immediately halt the application of recovered funds until a comprehensive reconciliation process is implemented and all existing discrepancies are resolved. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to balance the immediate need for recovery with the long-term implications of documentation integrity and regulatory compliance. The core challenge lies in ensuring that all recovered funds are accurately attributed and that the supporting documentation is robust enough to withstand scrutiny, both internally and externally, including potential regulatory audits or legal challenges. The professional must exercise careful judgment to avoid actions that could compromise the integrity of the recovery process or violate established guidelines. The correct approach involves meticulously verifying the source documentation for each recovery, cross-referencing it with the payment records, and ensuring that any discrepancies are thoroughly investigated and resolved before the recovery is finalized and recorded. This approach is correct because it upholds the fundamental principles of accurate financial record-keeping and regulatory adherence. Specifically, under the Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional (CSRP) framework, which emphasizes ethical conduct and adherence to best practices, maintaining accurate and verifiable documentation is paramount. This ensures transparency, accountability, and compliance with any applicable financial reporting or auditing standards that a CSRP would be expected to follow. It directly supports the integrity of the subrogation process by providing a clear audit trail. An incorrect approach that involves immediately applying the recovered funds to outstanding balances without first verifying the source documentation and reconciling discrepancies fails to meet the required standards of accuracy and due diligence. This could lead to misallocated funds, inaccurate financial reporting, and potential violations of internal controls or external regulations governing financial transactions. It bypasses the essential step of ensuring the legitimacy and proper attribution of the recovered amount, creating a significant risk of error and noncompliance. Another incorrect approach, which is to delay the reconciliation and documentation verification process until a later date, also presents significant risks. This delay can lead to the loss or misplacement of critical supporting documents, making future verification difficult or impossible. It also increases the likelihood of errors going unnoticed for extended periods, potentially impacting financial statements and increasing the risk of regulatory noncompliance if an audit occurs. Furthermore, it undermines the principle of timely and accurate financial reporting. A third incorrect approach, which is to rely solely on the third-party payer's documentation without independent verification, is also professionally unacceptable. While third-party documentation is important, a subrogation professional has a duty to ensure the accuracy and completeness of all information supporting a recovery. Over-reliance on external documentation without internal checks can lead to accepting inaccurate data, which can have downstream consequences for financial reporting and recovery accuracy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all recovery transactions. This includes 1. Obtaining and thoroughly reviewing all supporting documentation for the recovery. 2. Cross-referencing this documentation with internal payment records and any relevant policy details. 3. Investigating and resolving any discrepancies identified. And 4. Only then, finalizing the recording of the recovery and its application. This structured approach ensures that all recoveries are handled with the utmost accuracy, integrity, and compliance with professional standards. Question 4. System analysis indicates that a subrogating insurer is evaluating damages following a fire caused by a faulty product manufactured by a third party. The insurer has paid the insured for the full replacement cost of damaged personal property and has also reimbursed the insured for temporary living expenses incurred during the repair of their home. The insurer is now preparing to pursue subrogation against the manufacturer. Which of the following approaches to valuing the damages for subrogation is most consistent with regulatory compliance and professional standards? Option A. Valuing damages by including the full replacement cost of damaged property, documented temporary living expenses, and any other direct and foreseeable consequential losses proven to be caused by the faulty product. Option B. Valuing damages by estimating a recovery amount that is likely to be settled by the manufacturer, regardless of the actual documented losses. Option C. Valuing damages solely based on the total amount paid out by the insurer to the insured. Option D. Valuing damages by only considering the depreciated value of the damaged personal property, even though the insured was compensated for the full replacement cost. The correct answer is C. valuing damages solely based on the total amount paid out by the insurer to the insured. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in subrogation, where the insurer seeks to recover damages from a third party responsible for a loss. The professional challenge lies in accurately valuing the damages to ensure a fair and legally defensible recovery, avoiding both underrecovery, leaving the insured undercompensated, and overrecovery, unjust enrichment. The core of this challenge is adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing damages valuation in subrogation, which, for the Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional (CSRP) exam, is presumed to be U.S. federal and state law, particularly principles of contract and tort law as applied to insurance. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment of all provable losses directly attributable to the third party's actions. This includes not only direct economic losses, e.g., repair costs, replacement value, but also consequential damages, where legally permissible and supported by evidence. The regulatory and ethical justification for this approach stems from the principle of making the injured party whole, as established in common law and reflected in insurance regulations that prohibit unjust enrichment and mandate fair claims handling. Subrogation is intended to shift the loss to the responsible party, not to provide a windfall to the insurer or leave the insured shortchanged. Therefore, a thorough and evidence-based valuation is paramount. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the amount paid out by the insurer without considering the actual cost of repair or replacement, or the full extent of the insured's loss. This failure to conduct a complete valuation could lead to an insufficient recovery, violating the insurer's duty to its insured and potentially breaching subrogation rights by not pursuing the full extent of recoverable damages. Another incorrect approach would be to include speculative or unsubstantiated damages. This is ethically problematic as it could be construed as attempting to recover more than what is legally owed, potentially violating principles of good faith and fair dealing, and could lead to legal challenges and sanctions. Furthermore, ignoring specific contractual limitations or legal precedents regarding recoverable damages would also be an incorrect approach, as it would fail to comply with the governing legal framework. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all relevant documentation, including policy provisions, repair estimates, invoices, and any expert reports. It requires understanding the applicable legal standards for damages in the relevant jurisdiction and applying them diligently. Professionals must maintain objectivity, relying on verifiable evidence rather than assumptions, and always act in accordance with ethical guidelines and regulatory requirements to ensure fair and accurate subrogation recovery. Question 5. Process analysis reveals that a subrogation professional is tasked with the initial review of a property damage claim involving a fire. The available documentation includes a preliminary fire report indicating the fire originated in the kitchen, a homeowner's statement attributing the cause to a faulty appliance, and an initial estimate for repairs. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of effective initial claim review for subrogation? Option A. Immediately initiating a subrogation demand against the appliance manufacturer based on the homeowner's statement and the preliminary report. Option B. Conducting a thorough review of all available documentation, including the policy, loss details, and any third-party information, to identify potential negligence or liability before proceeding with any recovery actions. Option C. Focusing solely on the repair estimate to determine the potential recovery amount and initiating contact with the homeowner to confirm the scope of damages. Option D. Closing the file as having no subrogation potential due to the homeowner's statement attributing the cause to a faulty appliance, without further investigation. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiating a subrogation demand against the appliance manufacturer based on the homeowner's statement and the preliminary report. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because the initial claim review is the foundational step in subrogation. Errors or omissions at this stage can lead to missed recovery opportunities, wasted resources, and potential violations of regulatory requirements or ethical obligations to the insurer. The pressure to process claims efficiently must be balanced with the meticulous attention to detail required to identify all potential subrogation avenues. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all available documentation, including the loss report, policy details, witness statements, and any initial repair estimates or invoices. This thoroughness ensures that all relevant facts are identified and that the claim aligns with subrogation principles, such as identifying a third party whose negligence or wrongful act caused the loss. This aligns with the CSRP ethical duty to act with diligence and competence, and implicitly with regulatory expectations for prudent claims handling and recovery efforts, which prioritize maximizing recovery for the insurer within legal and ethical bounds. An approach that focuses solely on the immediate repair cost without investigating the cause of the loss is incorrect. This failure to investigate the root cause bypasses the fundamental requirement of subrogation, which is to identify a responsible third party. This can lead to a violation of the duty of care owed to the insurer by neglecting a potential recovery source. Another incorrect approach is to prematurely close a file based on an assumption of no third-party liability without a documented investigation. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and competence, potentially violating CSRP ethical standards and failing to meet the insurer's expectation of diligent pursuit of recoveries. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy in reviewing initial documentation, leading to the overlooking of critical details that point to third-party involvement, is also professionally unacceptable. This haste can result in a failure to identify a valid subrogation claim, thereby breaching the duty to the insurer to act in their best financial interest and potentially contravening regulatory guidelines that mandate thorough claims investigation. Professionals should employ a systematic checklist-driven approach during initial claim review, ensuring every piece of documentation is examined for indicators of third-party responsibility. This includes cross-referencing information, identifying discrepancies, and documenting the rationale for pursuing or not pursuing subrogation. When in doubt, consulting with senior colleagues or legal counsel is a prudent step to ensure compliance with best practices and regulatory expectations. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal that a subrogation professional is handling a claim where the insured has two applicable insurance policies from different carriers. The insured's primary policy contains an other insurance clause stating its coverage is excess to any other valid and collectible insurance. The second policy, which the insured also holds, has an other insurance clause that states its coverage is primary unless the other insurance is specifically written to be excess. The loss occurred under circumstances where both policies could potentially apply. What is the most appropriate approach for the subrogation professional to determine which policy should be pursued for subrogation? Option A. Abandon the subrogation effort due to the presence of multiple insurance policies, as it complicates recovery. Option B. Analyze the specific wording of the other insurance clauses in both policies to determine which policy is primary and which is excess based on their contractual language and the facts of the loss. Option C. Interpret the other insurance clauses in a way that maximizes the recovery for the subrogating insurer, even if it requires a less literal reading of the policy terms. Option D. Immediately assume the policy with the higher coverage limit is the primary policy and pursue subrogation against that carrier. The correct answer is B. Analyze the specific wording of the other insurance clauses in both policies to determine which policy is primary and which is excess based on their contractual language and the facts of the loss. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a subrogation professional to navigate potentially conflicting policy provisions and determine the extent of coverage in subrogation rights without overstepping contractual boundaries or misrepresenting the policy's intent. The core difficulty lies in interpreting ambiguous language and applying it to a specific factual scenario, which demands meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of insurance contract principles. Careful judgment is required to avoid making assumptions that could jeopardize the subrogation claim or lead to a breach of the insurance contract. The correct approach involves a detailed analysis of the other insurance clause, specifically focusing on its wording regarding excess, pro rata, and escape provisions. This approach is professionally sound because it directly addresses the contractual language that dictates how multiple insurance policies interact and how subrogation rights are allocated when other coverage exists. By meticulously examining the specific wording of the other insurance clause in both policies and comparing it to the factual circumstances of the loss, the subrogation professional can accurately determine which policy is primary and which is excess. thereby establishing the correct party to pursue for subrogation. This aligns with the ethical obligation to represent the insureds and insurers' interests accurately and to pursue subrogation only where contractually and legally permissible. An incorrect approach would be to immediately assume the policy with the higher limit is primary. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it ignores the specific contractual language of the other insurance clause, which is the definitive determinant of primary and excess coverage. Relying solely on policy limits is an arbitrary decision that lacks contractual justification and could lead to pursuing the wrong insurer, potentially causing delays, increased costs, and damage to the insurer's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to abandon the subrogation effort entirely due to the presence of other insurance. This is a failure because it prematurely dismisses potential recovery without a proper analysis of the other insurance clause. Subrogation rights are often preserved, albeit potentially shared or adjusted, even when other insurance exists. A professional subrogation recovery professional has a duty to investigate all avenues of recovery. A third incorrect approach would be to interpret the other insurance clause in a manner that favors the subrogating insurer without clear contractual support. This constitutes an ethical failure, as it involves misrepresenting the policy's terms and potentially acting outside the scope of the subrogation agreement. Subrogation professionals must act with integrity and adhere strictly to the contractual provisions governing their actions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough review of all relevant insurance policies, paying particular attention to the other insurance clauses. This should be followed by a detailed factual investigation of the loss to understand how the policies apply to the specific circumstances. Legal counsel or claims specialists should be consulted if the policy language is particularly complex or ambiguous. The decision to pursue subrogation, and against whom, must be based on a clear understanding of the contractual rights and obligations derived from the policy analysis. Question 7. Consider a scenario where a CSRP is investigating a claim involving an insured who slipped and fell on a wet floor in a retail establishment. The insured states the floor was wet due to a recent spill that had not been cleaned up, and there were no warning signs. The CSRP has obtained initial incident reports and witness statements. What is the most appropriate next step for the CSRP to take to establish a strong premises liability claim? Option A. Advise the insured to seek immediate medical treatment and wait for further medical documentation before proceeding with any investigation. Option B. Conduct a detailed inspection of the premises to document the condition of the floor, look for evidence of the spill, and assess the establishment's general maintenance and safety protocols. Option C. Contact the retail establishment's insurance carrier to negotiate a settlement based on the initial information provided. Option D. Immediately file a lawsuit against the retail establishment based on the insured statement and the incident report. The correct answer is D. Immediately file a lawsuit against the retail establishment based on the insured statement and the incident report. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to navigate the complexities of premises liability law within the specific regulatory framework governing the Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional (CSRP) designation. The core challenge lies in accurately identifying the responsible party and the legal basis for recovery, ensuring all actions align with the CSRP ethical and regulatory obligations, particularly concerning due diligence and adherence to applicable statutes of limitations. The professional must balance the pursuit of recovery with the imperative to act within legal and ethical boundaries, avoiding actions that could jeopardize the claim or violate professional standards. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation of the property owner's duty of care, the breach of that duty, and the causal link between the breach and the damages sustained by the insured. This necessitates gathering evidence of the condition of the premises, any notice the owner had of the hazard, and the foreseeability of the incident. Adherence to the CSRP regulatory framework mandates a diligent and systematic approach to evidence collection and legal analysis, ensuring that any subrogation action is well-founded and compliant with all relevant laws and guidelines. This includes understanding the specific elements of premises liability as defined by the applicable jurisdiction statutes and case law, and ensuring that the recovery efforts are pursued within the statutory time limits. An incorrect approach would be to assume liability solely based on the occurrence of an injury on the property. This fails to acknowledge the legal requirement to prove negligence, including the owner's duty, breach, causation, and damages. Such an assumption bypasses the necessary investigative steps and could lead to pursuing a claim against the wrong party or without sufficient evidence, violating the CSRP duty of professional diligence. Another incorrect approach would be to initiate legal action without first conducting a comprehensive review of the applicable statute of limitations. Prematurely filing a lawsuit that is time-barred would not only be a waste of resources, but would also demonstrate a failure to exercise due diligence and professional competence, potentially exposing the professional to disciplinary action. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on hearsay or unsubstantiated reports regarding the condition of the property without independent verification. The CSRP framework requires that all assertions be supported by credible evidence. Failing to verify information and proceeding based on assumptions or uncorroborated accounts constitutes a breach of professional responsibility and can undermine the integrity of the subrogation claim. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the facts of the incident and the nature of the damages. Second, identify the relevant legal principles, specifically focusing on premises liability within the governing jurisdiction. Third, conduct a comprehensive investigation to gather all necessary evidence to establish the elements of the claim. Fourth, assess the strength of the claim and the likelihood of successful recovery, considering all potential defenses. And fifth, proceed with legal action only after confirming compliance with all procedural requirements, including statutes of limitations, and ensuring that the action is ethically sound and aligns with the CSRP professional obligations. Question 8. Operational review demonstrates that a subrogation recovery professional is investigating a complex property damage claim involving multiple parties and potential contributing factors. The professional has identified several potential sources of evidence, including the insured's internal incident reports, third-party vendor maintenance logs, and witness statements collected informally at the scene. To proceed effectively and ethically, which of the following investigative and documentation strategies best aligns with CSRP regulatory framework and professional standards? Option A. Access proprietary databases of involved third-party vendors without explicit consent to cross-reference maintenance logs, and rely primarily on informal notes taken during initial scene observations for witness accounts, assuming these are sufficient for claim substantiation. Option B. Immediately request and obtain all relevant documentation from the insured and third parties. Conduct formal recorded interviews with all identified witnesses and involved parties, and meticulously log every step of the investigation, including dates, times, individuals contacted, and information obtained, ensuring all documentation is stored securely and in its original format. Option C. Begin by drafting a preliminary subrogation demand letter based on initial assumptions, and then conduct a selective investigation to gather only the evidence that supports the predetermined demand, disregarding any information that might weaken the claim. Option D. Focus solely on obtaining the insured's internal incident reports, disregarding third-party vendor logs as potentially biased, and proceed with the claim based on this limited documentation, assuming witness statements are secondary and can be summarized without formal recording. The correct answer is B. Immediately request and obtain all relevant documentation from the insured and third parties. Conduct formal recorded interviews with all identified witnesses and involved parties, and meticulously log every step of the investigation, including dates, times, individuals contacted, and information obtained, ensuring all documentation is stored securely and in its original format. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in subrogation recovery, balancing the need for thorough investigation with the imperative to document findings accurately and ethically, all within the strict confines of the Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional CSRP regulatory framework. The professional challenge lies in discerning between legitimate investigative steps and actions that could compromise the integrity of the evidence or violate privacy and data protection regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all investigative actions are both legally permissible and ethically sound, directly impacting the admissibility and strength of the subrogation claim. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves systematically gathering all available documentation from the insured and relevant third parties, conducting interviews with key individuals involved, and meticulously documenting each step of the investigation. This aligns with CSRP guidelines emphasizing comprehensive evidence collection and accurate record keeping. The regulatory justification stems from the need to establish a clear chain of custody for evidence, ensure its authenticity, and demonstrate due diligence in the recovery process. Ethical considerations mandate transparency and fairness in how information is obtained and handled. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that involves unilaterally accessing proprietary databases without proper authorization or consent would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This violates data privacy laws and CSRP ethical standards regarding the acquisition of information. It could lead to the exclusion of evidence and potential legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on hearsay or unverified statements from individuals without corroborating documentation or formal interviews. This lacks the rigor required by CSRP standards for substantiating a claim and could be challenged as unreliable evidence. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of diligence. Finally, an approach that involves altering or selectively presenting documentation to favor the subrogation claim, even if seemingly minor, constitutes a severe ethical breach and potential regulatory violation. CSRP professionals are bound by principles of honesty and integrity, and any form of document manipulation undermines the entire recovery process and the credibility of the professional. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Identifying all potential sources of information. 2. Obtaining necessary authorizations and consents before accessing sensitive data. 3. Conducting interviews in a professional and recorded manner, ensuring accuracy. 4. Meticulously documenting all investigative actions, communications, and findings. 5. Regularly reviewing documentation for completeness and accuracy against CSRP standards and applicable regulations. 6. Seeking legal counsel when in doubt about the legality or ethical implications of an investigative step. Question 9. The evaluation methodology shows a consistent reliance on the depreciated replacement cost of a specialized piece of industrial equipment damaged in a covered event, with no consideration for the market for used equipment of that type. Option A. This approach is appropriate as it reflects the cost to replace the damaged asset with a new one, adjusted for its age and wear. Option B. This approach is not appropriate because fair market value requires consideration of what a willing buyer would pay, which may include the used equipment market, even for specialized items. Option C. This approach is appropriate if the equipment is highly specialized and has no readily available comparable sales data. Option D. This approach is appropriate as it focuses on the cost incurred by the insured to replace the equipment, which is the primary concern in subrogation. The correct answer is A. This approach is appropriate as it reflects the cost to replace the damaged asset with a new one, adjusted for its age and wear. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because determining fair market value, FMV, for subrogation purposes requires a nuanced understanding of applicable regulations and ethical obligations, particularly when dealing with unique or specialized assets. The Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional, CSRP, must ensure that the valuation accurately reflects what a willing buyer would pay a willing seller in an arm's-length transaction, without being influenced by the specific circumstances of the loss or the recovery process. This requires adherence to established valuation principles and regulatory guidance to avoid over or understating the recoverable amount, which could impact the insured, the insurer, and potentially third parties. The correct approach involves utilizing a methodology that is widely accepted within the industry and aligns with regulatory expectations for FMV determination. This typically includes considering multiple valuation methods, such as comparable sales, cost approach, and income approach, and then reconciling these to arrive at a defensible FMV. The regulatory framework for subrogation professionals is governed by bodies like the NAIC, National Association of Insurance Commissioners, in the U.S., emphasizes fairness and accuracy in claims handling and recovery. A methodology that relies on objective data, expert opinion where necessary, and a clear rationale for the final valuation best aligns with these principles. It ensures that the recovery is based on the actual value of the damaged property, not on speculative or biased figures. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the original purchase price of the asset fails to account for depreciation, market fluctuations, or any improvements made. This is ethically problematic as it can lead to an inaccurate recovery amount, potentially shortchanging the insured or overstating the insurer's claim. Furthermore, it may violate regulatory requirements for accurate claims valuation. Another incorrect approach that uses a valuation based on the cost of replacement without considering depreciation or salvage value is also flawed. This method inflates the value by ignoring the fact that the asset was not new at the time of loss. Regulations often require valuations to reflect the depreciated value of the property. A third incorrect approach that uses a valuation based on an arbitrary percentage of the original cost, without any supporting data or methodology, is fundamentally unsound and ethically indefensible. This lacks objectivity and is not compliant with any recognized valuation standard or regulatory expectation for fair claims handling. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the governing jurisdiction, consulting relevant industry, best practices, and valuation standards, and applying a systematic and well-documented valuation process. When faced with complex assets, engaging qualified appraisers or valuation experts is a crucial step to ensure accuracy and defensibility. The ultimate goal is to achieve a fair and equitable outcome for all parties involved, grounded in objective valuation principles. Question 10. The risk matrix shows a moderate probability of recovery in a subrogation claim, but the statute of limitations is approaching rapidly. The insured has expressed a desire to avoid litigation if possible, but the responsible party's insurer has been unresponsive to initial settlement overtures. What is the most prudent approach to preserve the subrogation rights while respecting the insured's preferences and maximizing the likelihood of recovery? Option A. Wait for a response from the responsible party's insurer, even if it means the statute of limitations will expire, to avoid initiating litigation and potentially upsetting the insured. Option B. Immediately file a lawsuit to preserve the statute of limitations, while simultaneously communicating to the insured and the responsible party's insurer that the filing is a procedural necessity to protect rights and that settlement discussions will continue. Option C. Advise the insured that subrogation rights will likely be lost due to the approaching statute of limitations and that no further action can be taken without their explicit consent to file suit. Option D. File a lawsuit without informing the insured or the responsible party's insurer, as the primary goal is to secure the recovery for the insurer. The correct answer is B. Immediately file a lawsuit to preserve the statute of limitations, while simultaneously communicating to the insured and the responsible party's insurer that the filing is a procedural necessity to protect rights and that settlement discussions will continue. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the insurer's right to recover losses with the procedural complexities and potential for prejudice to the insured's rights. The decision to file a lawsuit involves strategic considerations beyond mere financial recovery, including the statute of limitations, the availability of evidence, and the potential impact on ongoing relationships. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the subrogation action is pursued effectively and ethically, without jeopardizing the insurer's position or violating any professional standards. The correct approach involves a thorough pre-suit investigation and a strategic decision based on the strength of the case, the likelihood of recovery, and the cost-benefit analysis, all within the applicable statute of limitations. This aligns with the principles of efficient claims handling and responsible subrogation practice, ensuring that legal action is a last resort and is pursued with a clear understanding of the legal and financial implications. Adhering to the statute of limitations is a fundamental legal requirement. Missing it extinguishes the right to pursue recovery, making timely action paramount. An incorrect approach would be to delay filing a lawsuit indefinitely, hoping for a settlement without initiating formal legal proceedings. This risks the statute of limitations expiring, thereby forfeiting the subrogation rights. Another incorrect approach is to file a lawsuit prematurely without adequate investigation, which can lead to a weak case, increased costs, and potential dismissal, wasting valuable resources and potentially prejudicing the insurer's recovery. Filing a lawsuit without a clear understanding of the applicable jurisdiction's procedural rules and evidentiary standards is also a failure, as it can lead to procedural errors that undermine the case. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive assessment of the subrogation potential, including a review of all relevant documentation and evidence. This should be followed by an analysis of the applicable statute of limitations and any pre-suit notice requirements. A cost-benefit analysis of pursuing litigation versus other recovery methods should then be conducted. If litigation is deemed appropriate, the decision to file should be based on a well-developed legal strategy, ensuring compliance with all procedural rules and ethical obligations. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows a subrogation professional reviewing a claim where the insured has submitted a detailed list of damages following a fire caused by a third party. The insured's list includes the cost of replacing items that were already depreciated, the cost of upgrades not necessitated by the fire, and a claim for inconvenience. Which of the following represents the most appropriate approach to assessing the recoverability of these damages from a subrogation perspective? Option A. Deduct depreciation from the replacement cost of damaged items and disallow claims for upgrades and inconvenience, as subrogation aims to recover actual losses and prevent unjust enrichment. Option B. Accept the insured's claim for inconvenience as a legitimate component of damages in all subrogation cases to expedite the recovery process. Option C. Prioritize recovering the maximum amount possible up to the policy limit, regardless of the specific nature or justification of each individual damage item. Option D. Focus on recovering the full replacement cost of all listed items, as presented by the insured, to ensure the insured is made whole. The correct answer is D. Focus on recovering the full replacement cost of all listed items, as presented by the insured, to ensure the insured is made whole. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a subrogation professional must assess the reasonableness and recoverability of damages claimed by an insured. This is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the applicable regulatory framework, specifically regarding the principles of indemnity and the avoidance of unjust enrichment, without resorting to purely mathematical exercises. The professional must balance the insured's right to be made whole with the insurer's right to recover payments made due to a third party's negligence. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate damages and those that may be inflated or unrecoverable under subrogation principles. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all documentation to ascertain that the claimed damages directly result from the third party's actions and are consistent with the policy's terms and conditions, adhering to the principle of indemnity. This means the insured should not profit from the loss. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing insurance practices and subrogation rights, mandate that recovery should be limited to the actual loss sustained and paid by the insurer. This approach ensures compliance with the fundamental principle of indemnity, preventing double recovery and upholding ethical subrogation practices. An incorrect approach would be to accept all claimed damages at face value without independent verification, simply because they are presented by the insured. This fails to uphold the insurer's duty to investigate the full extent of damages and their recoverability, potentially leading to the recovery of amounts not genuinely lost or not attributable to the third party's negligence. This violates the principle of indemnity and can lead to disputes and regulatory scrutiny for over-recovery. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the policy limits without considering the actual damages incurred. While policy limits define the maximum payout, subrogation recovery is tied to the actual loss and the amount paid by the insurer. Ignoring the actual loss and focusing only on the policy limit for recovery purposes would be a misapplication of subrogation principles and could lead to either under-recovery or over-recovery depending on the circumstances, both of which are professionally unsound. A further incorrect approach involves prioritizing the speed of recovery over the accuracy of the damage assessment. While efficiency is valued, rushing the process without a diligent review of the damage calculations and supporting evidence can lead to errors, improper claims, and ultimately, a failure to achieve a just and legally sound subrogation outcome. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and professional responsibility. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the claim, including a detailed examination of the loss, the cause of the loss, the policy provisions, and all supporting documentation for the claimed damages. This should be followed by an assessment of the recoverability of each component of the damages based on applicable laws and ethical subrogation principles, ensuring that the recovery sought is fair, reasonable, and legally justifiable. Question 12. Strategic planning requires a thorough assessment of potential recovery avenues following an insured loss. In a scenario where a third party's actions contributed to the loss, but they have subsequently made substantial, good-faith repairs to the damaged property, what is the most appropriate approach for a certified subrogation recovery professional, CSRP, to take regarding equitable subrogation? Option A. Advise the insured to negotiate a settlement with the third party, bypassing the insurer's subrogation rights entirely. Option B. Conduct a detailed investigation into the extent and nature of the third party's subsequent repairs, the timing of those repairs, and whether they were made in good faith, to determine if equitable subrogation is appropriate and legally defensible under U.S. law. Option C. Pursue subrogation based solely on the initial cause of the loss, assuming the third party's subsequent actions are irrelevant to the insurer's right to recover. Option D. Immediately initiate subrogation proceedings against the third party, as their initial actions clearly caused the loss. The correct answer is D. Immediately initiate subrogation proceedings against the third party, as their initial actions clearly caused the loss. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of equitable subrogation principles within the specific regulatory framework governing certified subrogation recovery professionals, CSRP, in the United States. The core difficulty lies in balancing the insurer's right to recover against the potential for unfairness to a third party who may have acted in good faith or made subsequent improvements. A CSRP must navigate these complexities while adhering strictly to U.S. insurance regulations and ethical guidelines for recovery professionals, ensuring that any subrogation action is both legally sound and ethically justifiable. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the specific circumstances of the loss and the actions of all parties involved, particularly the third party against whom subrogation is being considered. This includes meticulously documenting the causal link between the third party's actions and the loss, as well as assessing whether the third party had any legal or equitable defenses. Equitable subrogation, by its nature, is an equitable remedy, meaning it is granted at the discretion of the court based on fairness and justice. Therefore, a CSRP must gather evidence that clearly demonstrates the third party's responsibility and the absence of any equitable defenses that would preclude subrogation. This aligns with the CSRP duty to pursue recovery diligently and ethically, ensuring that the insurer is made whole without unjustly enriching them at the expense of an innocent or unfairly treated third party. Adherence to the principles of equitable subrogation, as interpreted under U.S. law, is paramount. An incorrect approach would be to automatically pursue subrogation against any third party identified as having contributed to the loss, without a detailed examination of equitable considerations. This fails to recognize that equitable subrogation is not an automatic right but a remedy that can be denied if it would be inequitable to enforce. For instance, if the third party made significant, good faith improvements to the property after the loss, and the insurer's subrogation claim would effectively negate the value of those improvements, a court might deny equitable subrogation. Another failure would be to ignore any potential waiver of subrogation rights that might have been agreed upon by the insured, as such waivers can extinguish the insurer's right to subrogate, even equitably. Furthermore, failing to consider the statute of limitations for bringing a subrogation claim would also be a critical regulatory and legal failure, rendering the recovery attempt invalid. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes a comprehensive factual investigation, followed by a legal analysis of the applicability of equitable subrogation principles under U.S. law. This involves assessing the strength of the evidence, identifying potential defenses, and considering the equitable implications for all parties. If the investigation reveals a strong case for equitable subrogation with minimal equitable defenses, the CSRP can proceed with a recovery action. If equitable considerations weigh heavily against subrogation, or if legal barriers exist, the professional must advise their client accordingly, demonstrating sound judgment and adherence to ethical and regulatory standards. Question 13. Operational review demonstrates that a junior recovery specialist has drafted a letter to a third-party tortfeasor's insurance carrier regarding a recent auto loss. The draft letter includes a demand for payment based on the insured's damages, but it also contains a statement asserting that the tortfeasor was clearly at fault, and that the recovery specialist has irrefutable proof of this fault. The letter was not reviewed by a senior professional before being sent. Which of the following approaches to handling this correspondence best aligns with the regulatory framework and professional standards for a certified subrogation recovery professional, CSRP? Option A. Immediately send the letter as drafted, as it clearly communicates the subrogating insurer's intent to recover damages and asserts the basis for the claim. Option B. Send the letter but instruct the junior specialist to be prepared to provide the irrefutable proof if requested by the third-party carrier. Option C. Recall the letter, revise it to remove the definitive statement of fault and the claim of irrefutable proof, and instead focus on presenting the facts of the loss and the subrogating insurer's claim for reimbursement, followed by a professional review. Option D. Forward the letter to the tortfeasor directly, bypassing their insurance carrier to expedite the recovery process. Correct answer is A. Immediately send the letter as drafted, as it clearly communicates the subrogating insurer's intent to recover damages and asserts the basis for the claim. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient and effective communication with the strict regulatory requirements governing subrogation correspondence. The Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional, CSRP, must ensure all communications are accurate, compliant, and do not inadvertently create unintended liabilities or prejudice the subrogation claim. The core challenge lies in tailoring communication to the specific recipient and purpose while adhering to the principles of good faith and fair dealing, and avoiding misrepresentation or misleading statements, all within the framework of applicable U.S. insurance regulations and professional ethical standards. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of the correspondence to ensure it accurately reflects the facts of the loss, clearly states the subrogating insurer's position, and complies with all relevant state insurance laws and regulations concerning claims handling and communication. This includes verifying that the correspondence does not contain any admissions of fault, misrepresentations of coverage, or threats, and that it is sent to the appropriate party with a clear purpose. This aligns with the CSRP duty to act with diligence and integrity, upholding the principles of fair claims practices and avoiding any actions that could be construed as unfair or deceptive. An incorrect approach would be to send a generic letter without verifying its contents against the specific claim file and applicable regulations. This could lead to factual inaccuracies, misstatements of legal liability, or violations of consumer protection laws, potentially resulting in regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and prejudice to the subrogation recovery. Another incorrect approach would be to include overly aggressive or threatening language. While subrogation aims to recover funds, communication must remain professional and adhere to regulations that prohibit unfair or deceptive practices in debt collection and claims handling. Such language could violate state unfair claims settlement practices acts and erode the professional standing of the recovery professional. A further incorrect approach would be to omit crucial information or misrepresent the subrogating insurer's rights. This lack of transparency or deliberate misstatement could be considered a deceptive practice, violating the duty of good faith and fair dealing owed to all parties involved in the claim. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all outgoing correspondence. This includes confirming factual accuracy, ensuring legal compliance with all applicable state and federal laws, such as the Fair Credit Reporting Act if applicable, and state insurance codes, verifying that the tone and content are professional and ethical, and confirming that the communication serves a legitimate subrogation purpose without creating undue hardship or prejudice to any party. A checklist approach, incorporating regulatory requirements and ethical considerations, can be a valuable tool. Question 14. System analysis indicates that an insurance company has paid a claim to its insured for damages caused by a negligent third party. Following the payment, the insured, without consulting the insurer, initiates a separate legal action against the third party for the same damages. The insurer, through its subrogation department, wishes to pursue recovery from the third party. Which of the following best defines the insurer's right and the CSRP role in this scenario. Option A. The CSRP must obtain the insured's explicit consent and active participation in the recovery process before the insurer can exercise its subrogation rights. Option B. The insurer's subrogation claim is invalid if the insured has already received any form of compensation from the third party, regardless of whether it fully indemnified the insurer. Option C. The insurer possesses the right of subrogation, allowing it to step into the insured's shoes to pursue the responsible third party for the amount paid, and the CSRP role is to manage this recovery process, irrespective of the insured's independent action. Option D. The insurer's subrogation rights are automatically waived if the insured initiates any legal action against the third party, and the CSRP should advise the insured to continue their action. The correct answer is C. The insurer possesses the right of subrogation, allowing it to step into the insured's shoes to pursue the responsible third party for the amount paid, and the CSRP role is to manage this recovery process, irrespective of the insured's independent action. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of subrogation's fundamental nature and its practical application within the regulatory framework governing certified subrogation recovery professionals, CSRP. The core difficulty lies in distinguishing between the insurer's inherent right to step into the shoes of the insured and the procedural requirements and limitations imposed by law and ethical guidelines. A CSRP must not only grasp the concept of subrogation, but also apply it correctly in a situation where the insured's actions might inadvertently compromise the insurer's recovery efforts. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the recovery process adheres strictly to legal and ethical standards, protecting both the insurer's interests and the insured's rights. The correct approach involves recognizing that subrogation is an equitable right that arises by operation of law or by contract, allowing an insurer who has paid a loss to pursue a third party responsible for that loss. This approach correctly identifies that the insurer's right to subrogate is not contingent on the insured's active participation in the recovery process after the claim has been paid, but rather on the fact of payment and the existence of a responsible third party. The regulatory framework for CSRP emphasizes acting with integrity and within legal bounds. This approach aligns with the definition of subrogation as the substitution of one party for another with respect to a legal claim or right, allowing the insurer to recover from the tortfeasor. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the insured's direct involvement in the recovery process after payment is flawed because it misunderstands the nature of subrogation. Subrogation is the insurer's right, not a right that the insured must actively facilitate post-payment. Legally, once the insurer has indemnified the insurer steps into the insured's shoes. Ethically, a CSRP must pursue recovery from the responsible third party, irrespective of whether the insured is willing or able to directly engage in that pursuit. This approach fails to acknowledge that the insurer's right is derivative and vests upon payment. Another incorrect approach that suggests the insurer's subrogation rights are extinguished if the insured has already received some form of compensation from the third party, even if insufficient to cover the full loss, is also problematic. Subrogation typically allows the insurer to recover the amount it paid to the insured. If the insured has received partial compensation, the insurer's subrogation claim is generally limited to the amount it paid, and the insured may retain any excess recovery. This approach incorrectly assumes that any prior compensation negates the insurer's right to recover its own outlay. A further incorrect approach that prioritizes the insured's potential future relationship with the third party over the insurer's established subrogation rights misinterprets the CSRP duty. While maintaining good client relationships is important, the CSRP primary obligation in subrogation is to recover the insurer's losses from the responsible party, as dictated by the subrogation agreement and applicable law. This approach would violate the insurer's contractual and legal rights and could expose the CSRP to disciplinary action for failing to uphold their professional responsibilities. The professional reasoning process for such situations should begin with a clear understanding of the definition and nature of subrogation as established by law and contract. The CSRP must then assess the specific facts of the case, identifying the responsible third party and the extent of the insurer's payment. The next step is to determine if any actions by the insured have prejudiced the insurer's subrogation rights. Finally, the CSRP must pursue recovery from the responsible third party in accordance with legal and ethical guidelines, ensuring that the insured's rights are respected, but not at the expense of the insurer's legitimate recovery. Question 15. Compliance review shows that following a covered loss where a third party may be at fault, a subrogation professional has communicated with the insured. The insured has expressed frustration about the loss and indicated a desire to recover their deductible directly from the at-fault party. The subrogation professional is considering how to respond, balancing the insurer's subrogation interests with the insured's expressed desire. Option A. Inform the insured that the insurer will pursue subrogation against the at-fault party to recover all damages, including the insured's deductible, and explain the process and timeline, while also clarifying the insured's role and any potential benefits they may receive from the subrogation recovery. Option B. Suggest that the insured pursue their deductible recovery independently and offer to provide the insured with the at-fault party's contact information, without informing the insurer of this direct communication or advice. Option C. Inform the insured that they are responsible for recovering their deductible and that the insurer will not be involved in any efforts to recover the deductible. Option D. Advise the insured that they are solely responsible for pursuing their deductible recovery from the at-fault party, and that the insurer's subrogation efforts will focus only on the insurer's losses. Correct answer is A. Inform the insured that the insurer will pursue subrogation against the at-fault party to recover all damages, including the insured's deductible, and explain the process and timeline, while also clarifying the insured's role and any potential benefits they may receive from the subrogation recovery. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it presents a direct conflict between the subrogation professional's duty to their client, the insurer, and the potential for a third party, the insured, to be unfairly burdened or misled. The core ethical consideration revolves around transparency, fairness, and avoiding conflicts of interest, all of which are paramount in maintaining professional integrity and adhering to regulatory expectations for certified subrogation recovery professionals, CSRP. Careful judgment is required to navigate the competing interests and ensure that actions align with ethical principles and applicable regulations. The correct approach involves prioritizing the insurer's subrogation rights while ensuring the insured is fully informed and not disadvantaged. This means clearly communicating the subrogation process, the insured's potential role, and any implications for their recovery, without creating an impression that the insurer is abandoning their responsibility or that the insured is solely responsible for the subrogation effort. This aligns with the CSRP fiduciary duty to their client and the broader ethical obligation to act with integrity and avoid misrepresentation. An incorrect approach that involves the subrogation professional directly soliciting the insured to pursue the third party independently, without clear disclosure and consent from the insurer, represents a failure to uphold the insurer's subrogation rights and potentially creates a conflict of interest. This could be seen as an attempt to circumvent the subrogation process or to shift the burden inappropriately. Another incorrect approach, which is to inform the insured that they are solely responsible for pursuing the third party and that the insurer will not be involved, is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This misrepresents the insurer's rights and obligations and could lead to the insured losing their right to recovery or incurring unnecessary costs. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of subrogation principles and the professional's duty to their client. A further incorrect approach, which is to proceed with subrogation efforts without any communication to the insured about the process or their potential involvement, while not as egregious as outright misrepresentation, still falls short of best professional practice. It can lead to misunderstandings, distrust, and potential complications if the insured is unaware of the ongoing efforts or their rights and responsibilities within the subrogation process. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the subrogation agreement, the applicable regulatory framework, and the ethical guidelines for CSRP. Professionals should always prioritize clear and transparent communication with their client, the insurer, accurately represent the subrogation process to all parties involved, and ensure that no party is misled or unfairly burdened. When in doubt, seeking guidance from legal counsel or professional ethics bodies is advisable. Question 16. The evaluation methodology shows that after a fire caused by a tenant's alleged negligence damaged the insured's property, the subrogation professional must determine the viability of pursuing recovery from the tenant. The lease agreement between the landlord, insured, and the tenant contains a clause stating that the tenant shall not be liable for any damage to the leased premises or its contents caused by fire, and that the tenant waives any right of subrogation against the landlord for such damages. The subrogation professional is aware that the tenant's actions directly contributed to the fire. What is the most appropriate course of action to preserve the insurer's subrogation rights, considering the lease provision? Option A. Conduct a thorough legal review of the lease agreement and applicable state law to determine the enforceability and scope of the waiver of subrogation provision as it pertains to the landlord's insurer's rights against the tenant. Option B. Immediately initiate subrogation proceedings against the tenant, as the insurer, standing in the shoes of the insured, has the right to recover from the negligent party regardless of any lease provisions. Option C. Advise the insured to pursue a claim directly against the tenant for the damages, as the insurer's subrogation rights may be complicated by the lease provision. Option D. Proceed with subrogation against the tenant, as the tenant's negligence is the direct cause of the loss and the waiver of subrogation in the lease is only intended to protect the tenant from the landlord, not the landlord's insurer. The correct answer is D. Proceed with subrogation against the tenant, as the tenant's negligence is the direct cause of the loss and the waiver of subrogation in the lease is only intended to protect the tenant from the landlord, not the landlord's insurer. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that a subrogation professional must navigate complex legal landscapes to effectively recover losses. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of when subrogation rights are preserved or extinguished, particularly when dealing with multiple parties and potential contractual waivers. Careful judgment is required to avoid jeopardizing the insurer's right to recovery and to ensure compliance with applicable laws. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all relevant contracts, including the lease agreement and any insurance policies, to determine if a waiver of subrogation provision exists and if it is enforceable under the governing jurisdiction's laws. This approach is right because it directly addresses the potential limitation on subrogation rights. Specifically, if an enforceable waiver of subrogation exists in favor of the tenant, the insurer's subrogation rights against the tenant would be extinguished. This aligns with the principle that an insurer stands in the shoes of its insured and is subject to any defenses or limitations that would have been available against the insured. The regulatory framework for subrogation recovery professionals emphasizes adherence to contractual terms and legal precedent in pursuing recovery. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with subrogation against the tenant without first verifying the existence and enforceability of a waiver of subrogation. This is a regulatory failure because it disregards a potential contractual limitation that could render the subrogation attempt futile and potentially expose the insurer to unnecessary legal costs. Ethically, it is a failure to act with due diligence and to protect the interests of the insurer by pursuing a claim that may be legally barred. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that a waiver of subrogation in a lease agreement automatically extinguishes subrogation rights against all parties, including third parties not directly named in the waiver. This is a legal misinterpretation and a regulatory failure. Subrogation waivers are typically construed narrowly and are generally only effective against the parties specifically named or clearly contemplated by the waiver provision. Pursuing recovery against a third party when the waiver only applies to the tenant would be a violation of established subrogation principles and potentially expose the insurer to claims of bad faith or improper litigation. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the fact that the insured's property was damaged due to the tenant's alleged negligence, without considering any contractual limitations. This is a failure to conduct a comprehensive legal analysis. While negligence is a prerequisite for subrogation, the existence of a valid waiver of subrogation can override the right to pursue recovery, even in cases of clear negligence. This approach ignores a critical legal defense that could be raised by the tenant. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all relevant documentation, including insurance policies and contracts, to identify any potential limitations on subrogation rights. This should be followed by legal research to ascertain the enforceability of such limitations under the governing jurisdiction's laws. A risk assessment should then be conducted to weigh the potential for recovery against the costs and legal complexities involved, ensuring that any pursuit of subrogation is legally sound and ethically justifiable. Question 17. Market research demonstrates that insureds sometimes delay reporting losses, which can impact the insurer's ability to pursue subrogation. In a scenario where an insured reports a property damage loss 6 months after the incident, and the insurer identifies a potentially liable third party, what is the primary legal consideration that dictates the insurer's immediate course of action regarding subrogation? Option A. The specific state's statute of limitations applicable to the type of property damage claim. Option B. The insurer's internal claims handling guidelines for subrogation. Option C. The insured's contractual obligation to report losses promptly, as outlined in the policy. Option D. The estimated cost of pursuing subrogation against the third party. The correct answer is C. The insured's contractual obligation to report losses promptly, as outlined in the policy. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to navigate the complex interplay between state-specific statutes of limitations and the contractual obligations of an insured. The insured's failure to promptly report the loss, while potentially a breach of their policy, does not automatically extinguish the insurer's subrogation rights, especially if the insurer can still demonstrate a viable claim against the responsible third party within the legally prescribed timeframe. The insurer must balance its duty to its insured with its right to recover from a tortfeasor. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the specific state's statutes of limitations applicable to the type of claim, e.g., property damage, personal injury, and a careful review of the insurance policy's subrogation clause and notice provisions. This approach is correct because it prioritizes adherence to the governing legal framework. The statute of limitations is a jurisdictional imperative that dictates the absolute deadline for filing a lawsuit. Failure to act within this period renders the claim legally unenforceable, regardless of the merits of the case or the insured's actions. By initiating subrogation efforts promptly after identifying a potentially viable third-party claim, the insurer preserves its legal recourse and fulfills its obligation to pursue recovery efficiently. This aligns with the fundamental principles of subrogation, which aim to place the loss on the party responsible for it. An incorrect approach would be to immediately abandon subrogation efforts solely based on the insured's delayed reporting, without first verifying the applicable statute of limitations. This fails to acknowledge that the insured's breach, if any, is a separate issue from the insurer's right to subrogate against a third party. The insurer's contractual relationship with the insured does not negate the legal rights and obligations between the insurer and the responsible third party. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with subrogation without confirming the statute of limitations has not expired. This would lead to wasted resources and a futile legal effort, as any lawsuit filed after the statute of limitations has tolled would be dismissed. A further incorrect approach would be to assume the insured's policy breach automatically voids the subrogation right. While an insured's non-cooperation can sometimes prejudice subrogation efforts, it does not inherently extinguish the insurer's right to pursue recovery from a third party, especially if the insurer can still prove its case. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the governing jurisdiction and its relevant statutes of limitations. This should be followed by a comprehensive review of the insurance policy, specifically the subrogation and notice clauses. The next step involves assessing the merits of the potential subrogation claim against the third party. Finally, a risk-benefit analysis should be conducted, considering the likelihood of recovery, the costs involved, and the impact on the insured-insurer relationship, all within the strict confines of the applicable legal deadlines. Question 18. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some recovery professionals are using discrete video recordings of individuals at the scene of a loss to gather evidence for subrogation. These recordings are made without the explicit consent of the individuals being filmed, though they are in a location where the loss occurred. The individuals are not directly involved in the loss itself, but are present at the scene. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach for a certified subrogation recovery professional, CSRP, in this situation? Option A. Continue discreetly recording individuals at the scene without consent, as the footage may provide crucial evidence for the subrogation claim. Option B. Obtain explicit consent from individuals before recording them, or ensure that any recording is conducted in a public area where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy, and the recording is directly related to the loss event. Option C. Cease all video recording of individuals at the scene and focus solely on documenting the physical damage and circumstances of the loss without capturing any identifiable persons. Option D. Advise the client to pursue legal action to obtain a court order for the recording of individuals at the scene, regardless of the likelihood of success. Correct answer is A. Continue discreetly recording individuals at the scene without consent, as the footage may provide crucial evidence for the subrogation claim. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the need for thorough evidence gathering against the ethical obligation to respect privacy and obtain consent. Subrogation professionals must balance the pursuit of recovery with adherence to legal and ethical boundaries. The use of photographs and videos as evidence is crucial for establishing fault and damages, but the method of acquisition can have significant legal and ethical ramifications. Careful judgment is required to ensure that evidence is obtained lawfully and ethically, without infringing on individuals' rights or violating privacy expectations. The correct approach involves obtaining consent before recording individuals or their private property, or ensuring that any recording is done in a public space where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. This aligns with general privacy principles and specific regulations that govern the collection and use of personal information and imagery. In the context of subrogation, this means that while documenting a scene of loss is necessary, intrusive recording of individuals without their knowledge or permission, especially in private settings, is unacceptable. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct, ensuring that evidence is admissible and that the recovery professional maintains professional integrity. An incorrect approach would be to surreptitiously record individuals or their private property without consent, even if it appears to directly support the subrogation claim. This violates privacy rights and potentially applicable laws regarding surveillance and recording. Such actions can lead to legal challenges, exclusion of evidence, and damage to the professional's reputation and the reputation of their firm. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because a loss occurred on a property, all activities on that property are fair game for recording. This ignores the distinction between documenting the scene of the loss and intrusive surveillance of individuals or their private activities. Finally, relying solely on the potential for recovery to justify ethically questionable evidence gathering is a failure of professional judgment, as it prioritizes financial gain over legal and ethical obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the objective, gathering evidence for subrogation. They must then consider the available methods of evidence collection, evaluating each for its legality and ethical implications. This involves understanding relevant privacy laws and ethical codes. If a method of evidence collection, such as photography or videography, could potentially infringe on privacy or be obtained unlawfully, the professional must seek alternative, lawful, and ethical means. This might involve obtaining consent, working with law enforcement, or focusing on publicly visible aspects of the loss. The guiding principle should always be to obtain evidence that is both effective and unimpeachable from a legal and ethical standpoint. Question 19. The audit findings indicate that a subrogation professional pursuing a claim for damaged business equipment has calculated the recoverable amount based on the cost to purchase brand new, identical equipment, without accounting for the age or wear and tear of the original items. The policy in question provides for actual cash value (ACV) coverage. Which of the following approaches to determining the recoverable amount is most consistent with regulatory requirements and the principle of indemnity? Option A. Calculate the recoverable amount based on the original purchase price of the damaged equipment, regardless of its current market value or replacement cost. Option B. Calculate the recoverable amount based on a nominal depreciation figure, as the equipment was still functional prior to the loss. Option C. Calculate the recoverable amount based on the full replacement cost of new equipment, as this ensures the insured can acquire identical replacements. Option D. Calculate the recoverable amount by determining the replacement cost of the damaged equipment, and then deducting an amount for depreciation based on its age and condition at the time of the loss. Correct answer is D. Calculate the recoverable amount by determining the replacement cost of the damaged equipment, and then deducting an amount for depreciation based on its age and condition at the time of the loss. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to navigate the nuances of replacement cost valuation in a claim settlement, balancing the insurer's financial interests with the insured's right to be made whole. The core difficulty lies in determining the appropriate method for valuing damaged property, particularly when the property is not new or has depreciated. A subrogation professional must ensure that the recovery aligns with the principles of indemnity, preventing unjust enrichment for either party, while adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing insurance claims in the relevant jurisdiction. The correct approach involves valuing the damaged property at its actual cash value (ACV) at the time of the loss, which is typically replacement cost less depreciation. This aligns with the principle of indemnity, which aims to restore the insured to the financial position they were in immediately before the loss, no more and no less. Regulatory frameworks for insurance claims, such as those enforced by state insurance departments in the U.S., generally mandate that ACV be used for settlement, unless the policy specifically provides for replacement cost value (RCV) coverage, and the insured actually replaces the property. Subrogation professionals are ethically bound to pursue recovery based on the actual loss sustained by the insurer, which is dictated by the policy terms and applicable law. An incorrect approach would be to pursue recovery based on the full replacement cost without considering depreciation, especially if the policy only covers ACV or if the insured has not yet replaced the property. This would violate the principle of indemnity by potentially overcovering for the insurer, and could lead to a claim for a greater amount than the actual loss. Such an action could be seen as a misrepresentation of the loss sustained, potentially violating unfair claims settlement practices regulations that prohibit misrepresenting pertinent facts or policy provisions relating to coverage. Another incorrect approach would be to settle for a significantly depreciated value that does not adequately reflect the remaining useful life or condition of the property, thereby failing to make the insured whole. While ACV is the standard, an unreasonably low depreciation calculation could lead to a claim that is not in line with the policy's intent to indemnify. This could also be viewed as a failure to act in good faith and fair dealing, a fundamental tenet of insurance regulation. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the specific policy language regarding replacement cost coverage. If the policy clearly states that RCV applies, and the insured has met the conditions for RCV settlement, e.g., actual replacement, then pursuing only ACV would be a failure to adhere to the contractual obligations and could expose the insurer to further liability or the insured to a claim of bad faith. The professional decision-making process in such situations requires a thorough review of the insurance policy, an accurate assessment of the damaged property's condition and age, an understanding of applicable depreciation schedules and methods, and a firm grasp of the governing regulatory requirements for claims settlement and subrogation. Professionals must prioritize adherence to the principle of indemnity and all relevant legal and ethical standards. Question 20. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a subrogation professional is evaluating the potential use of an expert witness to establish the cause of a complex industrial accident. The expert has extensive credentials and has provided a preliminary opinion supporting the subrogation claim. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with U.S. federal and state evidentiary standards for expert testimony in a subrogation recovery action? Option A. Engaging the expert and immediately filing a lawsuit based on their preliminary opinion, deferring detailed review of their methodology until discovery. Option B. Conducting a thorough pre-engagement review of the expert's qualifications, the factual basis for their opinion, and the reliability of their methodology, ensuring it meets Daubert or applicable state standards. Option C. Accepting the expert's opinion at face value, assuming their experience inherently validates their conclusions, and proceeding with the subrogation claim without further independent verification. Option D. Relying on the expert's stated credentials and preliminary opinion to draft the subrogation demand letter and prepare for litigation. The correct answer is D. Relying on the expert's stated credentials and preliminary opinion to draft the subrogation demand letter and prepare for litigation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to critically evaluate the admissibility and weight of expert opinion evidence within the specific regulatory framework governing subrogation recovery in the United States. The professional must balance the need for expert support to establish causation and damages against the potential for unreliable or inadmissible expert testimony, which could jeopardize the recovery effort and expose the professional to ethical and legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any expert engaged and their opinions meet the Daubert standard or its state law equivalent, as adopted by U.S. courts. The correct approach involves a thorough pre-engagement vetting of the expert's qualifications, methodology, and the reliability of their conclusions, ensuring their opinion is based on sufficient facts or data and is the product of reliable principles and methods. This aligns with the ethical obligations of a subrogation professional to act with diligence and competence, and the legal requirement to present admissible evidence. Specifically, under U.S. federal rules of evidence and many state equivalents, an expert's testimony must be relevant and reliable to be admitted. This means the expert must be qualified, their testimony must assist the trier of fact, and their methodology must be sound and generally accepted within their field, or demonstrably reliable under the Daubert factors: testability, peer review, known error rate, acceptance within the field. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the expert's assertion of expertise, without independent verification of their methodology, or the factual basis of their opinion, fails to meet the standard of due diligence. This can lead to the exclusion of critical evidence, weakening the subrogation claim. Another incorrect approach, which involves accepting an expert's opinion without scrutinizing its alignment with the specific facts of the case, risks presenting speculative or irrelevant testimony. This not only undermines the claim, but also violates the professional duty to present accurate and well-supported arguments. Furthermore, engaging an expert whose methodology is demonstrably flawed or not generally accepted in their field, even if they possess impressive credentials, constitutes a failure to adhere to the principles of reliable expert testimony, potentially leading to sanctions or adverse judgments. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-step evaluation. 1. Identify the specific legal and regulatory standards for expert testimony in the relevant jurisdiction. 2. Conduct a comprehensive background check on potential experts, focusing on their credentials, experience, and prior testimony. 3. Critically review the expert's proposed methodology and ensure it is scientifically sound, reliable, and applicable to the facts of the case. 4. Obtain a written report from the expert that clearly articulates their findings, the basis for their conclusions, and addresses all relevant aspects of the subrogation claim. 5. Be prepared to challenge or defend the expert's opinion based on the established legal standards.